The Percy Jackson and the Olympians television series is finally here. In spite of nearly 25% of the characters bearing a strong resemblance to their book counterparts, everyone can agree that this is definitely a better adaptation than the 2010 film. However, I do have a couple of complaints and changes that I would have done for my own personal benefit or for the benefit of others. Here are my thoughts on how I could have done the show better as follows. Number 1. 3 alternate openings. Instead of Percy narrating the story in the cold open, I have 3 alternate openings that I think could have enhanced or degraded the story if they had taken place before he utters the iconic opening line, one romantic, one dramatic, and the other a framing setup. The first opening, the romantic version, shows how Sally and Poseidon first met instead of it being a flashback for the Montauk scene. It is a slow montage with no dialogue or sound effects, just music. The cinematography and mise-en-scène are highly reminiscent to the opening of The Notebook, in which Sally and Poseidon are dark figures silhouetted against the red light of dawn, almost completely obscured. We see Sally walking up to the beach and Poseidon stepping out of the water, going on a boat ride, and everything else we saw in the show. As the montage draws to a close, we finally get a good look at Sally seeing Poseidon is gone and she is pregnant. We cut to her giving birth to Percy, and her first line is her christening him. The music ends as the scene dissolves to 12 years later with Sally staring out the window of her apartment when Gabe calls her for his 7-bean dip. She responds, leaves the window, and we pan all the way out towards Manhattan in the direction of the museum, and then we hear Percy's opening monologue. The dramatic version, the second one, is a bit similar to the opening of the 20th Century Fox adaptation, in which we get to see the winter solstice meeting with the gods. Everything is copacetic until Hermes tells everyone that the Master Bolt has been stolen. Zeus and Poseidon get into an argument, and then Zeus tells everyone that there will be a war. The framing setup, the third one, would be Percy as an adult telling the story of his life to his kids or even the younger campers of Camp Half-Blood. First he starts with, "Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood." There is a flash of lightning, and we cut to Percy's 12-year-old self like in the real show. Number 2. Seeing more of Percy's life before Camp Half-Blood. Percy did mention other incidents that happened before Yancey, and it would have been both a hilarious and a very sad way of seeing how he got expelled from several different schools. But of course, they do have a budget, and it's not very big. Number 3. Principal Riordan. When I saw that principal and how desperate and worried he looked in his efforts to find Percy and get him off the roof, I knew in a moment that Rick pretty much wasted a good opportunity to play the guy because Percy is his baby, and seeing him act more like a concerned father than a typical school principal would definitely be in his DNA. But if there is one good side, it is seeing a Pegasi and one of those animatronic bulls. The Cochrane bulls, I think. I also like the flashback where Percy and his mom go to the museum, but I kind of miss Mr. Brunner's lecture. It would have felt more like you were in school again listening to an awesome speech on mythology. But then again, to most kids of the 2000s, school was boring. I understand that Rick did make a cameo in the office scene later on, but I would have preferred him playing a principal. Number 4. Nancy calling Percy a dumb blonde. If Nancy was that cruel, she'd probably have another reason to call Percy dumb, because he's blonde. Even if such a stereotype has faded into obscurity, it would probably still make you want to give you another reason for hating her. It also could have given Percy some development as he learns for himself and proves Nancy wrong that not all blondes are dumb. Number 5. Percy calls Nancy out. Even if the scene we got was close to the book, one change I would make that I would find to be cathartic would be Percy telling Nancy what kind of a person she is before he pushes her into the fountain, and it would go something like this. "Don't you have anything better to do in your spare time, one that doesn't involve being a bitch?" "Well, maybe I like being a bitch. It makes me feel like a goddess." "Well, guess what, Nancy? You're not a goddess. You're just as human as you and I. And if you had any decency like a real human should, you would treat me, my friend, with some respect." Slaps Nancy and force pushes her into the fountain. Number 6. Percy versus Mrs. Dodds. Dawn of the Unnecessary Relocation. One of the things the Fox adaptation of The Lightning Thief ironically got right was Percy's fight with Electo/Mrs. Dodds taking place in an empty part of the museum and Mr. Brunner giving Percy the Riptide pen in the middle of the fight. Here, the fight takes place outside, and Mr. Brunner gives Percy Riptide before the fight. I find this change to be very odd and the fight itself to be very underwhelming. Rick has a lot of explaining to do. One minor note. I think Percy should have said the now infamous line, "But this is a pen." Number 7. My Riptide sense is tingling. I'm not sure what led Rick to make Riptide be Percy's personal alarm, and while I kinda like it, I feel mixed, because what if it gets too loud and the enemy hears it? Number 8. Intertitles for each chapter. One creative way of telling the audience when a chapter begins is a title card, maybe one slightly animated and drawn on a piece of school textbook paper. Think Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I know it's cheesy, but then again, drama is better. Number 9. At 2, Grover? One change that does not seem to sit well with me is Grover telling the heads of Yancey that he encouraged Percy to push Nancy into the fountain. It makes Percy's defection from Grover pretty dramatic, but at the same time, Grover not being able to tell a secret can also be concerning. Number 10. Has it now become a sin to feature gaslighting in a kids' show? Aside from one mention, Mr. Brunner and Grover are never seen gaslighting Percy over the denial of Mrs. Dodds' existence. Instead, we get a "you are special" speech from Mr. Brunner. And I ask, why? Featuring the gaslighting would have made the show feel more like a suspense thriller a la Hitchcock and adds to the mystery. But no, they just skip ahead to Percy's expulsion. I guess they didn't want it to be too serious. Number 10. A different wardrobe for the Fates. This should have been in the episode itself. I saw this in a trailer which did feature the Fates. I'm glad that at least one of the Fates looks like her book counterpart, but I'm not too crazy over their clothes. When I read The Lightning Thief, I imagined them wearing wide beekeeper/gardener uniforms or cloaks, either white like in the graphic novel, black like in The Mist, or red, green, and blue like the Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus, red for Atropos, green for Clotho, and blue for Lachesis, which is also similar to the Fates from Disney's Hercules. In my opinion, the cloaks make the Fates look more ominous and mysterious, but I guess if you want to be more inconspicuous, giving them normal clothes is the best route. Also, why did they get rid of their scene during Percy's drive home? Number 12. Percy's apartment should have been a lot messier. When I read the book, I imagined the apartment to look a lot more grimer, with stuff scattered all over. What I saw was mostly restricted to Gabe's area. Also, Gabe himself doesn't appear to be too much of a douchebag, and he's hardly the fat walrus Percy described him to be. When I think of a father who is a real douchebag, I think of Neil Hargrove from Stranger Things. I suppose it's become a real taboo to depict child abuse in kids' shows, so they watered Gabe down. Number 13. Gabe's big flat screen TV and Sally's song. One of the things I wanted for the show was it to be a homage to the 2000s, similar to how Stranger Things paid homage to the 80s. So when I saw Gabe's 4K TV and Sally listening to what I think is Olivia Rodrigo's song, I was a bit livid. If I did the show, I would replace the TV with an old set from the 90s and have Sally listening to It Must Have Been Love by Roxette, because the song would have been around in 1992. When Sally met Poseidon, and I felt that the lyrics resonated with Sally missing Poseidon. Oh, and by the way, where's her Sweet on America shirt? At least they got the blue candy. Number 14. Gabe and Sally fighting like an old married couple. Even though they are married, Sally and Gabe didn't sound like they hate each other. They sound like they're a normal couple with marriage issues. Also, I really wish Percy called Gabe a bald-headed freak when he told him to take his shoes off before entering the car. But of course, seeing as Gabe's not bald, it kind of makes more sense. Number 15. Even pacing. One thing I wanted was for the show to have a slow moment of pacing like Percy and Sally driving to Montauk while listening to Jesse McCartney on the radio to give us a moment of mother and son bonding time. Why Jesse McCartney? 'Cause I wanted to be set in the 2000s. Cutting from the apartment to the last bit of drive to Montauk was a bit fast for me. Also, I don't think it rained when they arrived, but I could have been reading the book wrong. Number 16, a romantic flashback. To make up for the alternate opening, a flashback between Sally and Poseidon would have been nice, while Sally is explaining to Percy how she and his father met. But I guess they didn't do it because they didn't want to give Poseidon's face and identity away. Also, whose idea was it to tell Sally that Percy is a half-blood? Shouldn't it have been Chiron or Grover? Also, missed opportunity to have Percy say, "What kind of version of the talk is this?" Number 17. Oh look, a goat, and he seems to be stuck in a trash can. One way that could have made Grover's reveal as a satyr to be both hilarious and shocking would be Percy and Sally finding him in a trash can. For those who don't know, the line is a reference to the musical where Percy says it. Also, I feel that Percy should have been a lot more freaked out to see that his best friend, whom he had known for who knows how long, should be a satyr. Imagine him saying, "Holy fucking shit, Grover, why do you have a fucking donkey up your—" Grover, ask me not. Not to mention, if I had it my way and not Disney's or Rick's, I would have had him throwing profane words left and right. See also my previous quote. But I guess that after the fight with Mrs. Dodds, he's bound to be less fazed. Number 18. The Death of Sally Jackson, the not-so-drowning artax of our generation. When I saw Sally's death, I didn't feel too much emotion. I felt like this should have been our equivalent of the death of Littlefoot's mother or Sirius Black falling into the Vale. But I felt nothing, if not just a little. Not to mention, Sally was the one who distracted the Minotaur with Percy's red jacket instead of Percy himself. Also, I think the Minotaur scene could have been a lot more scarier. And probably a lot more courageous because I made a version of it set to running up that hill, the Stranger Things version. Number 19, the denouement. So Percy defeats the Minotaur, and it just cuts to black? I kinda expected him to scream "Mom" one last time in agony for an extra pull at the heartstrings, but at least the last few lines of dialogue made up for that, because they were from the book. Number 20, a better title sequence. What makes Stranger Things and Breaking Bad the most awesome shows around? Their title sequences. Percy's was pretty short and nothing of special, and it should have been more lengthy and a slow reveal like the arranging letters of Stranger Things. Simply put, title sequences should be more amazing and able to drive the audience in. At least they made up for that with the end titles. So what did you think? Did the changes enhance the story, or did they make them worse? Let me know in the comments section below.